Bản đầy đủ cuộc tranh luận giữa các nhà khoa học hàng đầu, một bên bảo vệ học thuyết tiến hóa, ông Richard Dawkin. Một bên là thiết kế thông minh Intelligent Design It. Bên ID chỉ nói rằng, với 40 năm nghiên cứu não bộ, tôi chắc chắn đây là một sản phẩm của sáng tạo bằng Chúa. Chấm hết, chỉ bằng một câu chắc chắn, rồi ông nhắc lại vụ hóa thạch Pew Down, một vụ bê bối của một nhà khảo cổ nghiệp dư đã bị phanh phui. Thực tế là nó chẳng liên quan đến việc các nhà khoa học nghiên cứu về sự tiến hóa. Bên ID luôn phủi sạch hoặc bỏ ngoài tai những bằng chứng thuyết phục được giới khoa học công nhận. Hoặc thậm chí, những kiến thức khoa học cơ bản cũng bị họ bỏ qua để bảo vệ sự sáng tạo của Chúa.
Can reconcile being a Christian first and a scientist second? Well, if one doesn't have a reverence for a divine creator after studying the brain for almost half a century, he has more important things to learn than neuroscience, in my opinion. Firstly, we'll never fully grasp the complexities of the brain. It's the black box of the body, unlike the pump, the heart, or the filters, the liver, the kidney, the spleen, or the oxygen exchangers, the lungs, and their biochemistries. Our understanding of the brain's anatomy and neurochemistry is truly primitive. With that observation, I can confidently say, without reservation, after studying neuroscience for the better part of 48 years, that the brain is irrefutable evidence that we're a creation and not a gradually progressive accident. The brain has to be God's crowning achievement in creating the human body, albeit not quite so evident in politicians and lawyers.
That's what I call the argument from personal incredulity. The man says, I don't understand it, therefore God did it. That's pathetic. If you look at brains, nervous systems throughout the whole animal kingdom, you'll see a really continuous gradation. Of course, it's not really evolution. They're all living creatures today, but you can see you start with cnidarians, with sea anemones, and you have just a diffuse neural network. And then you go on to worms that have a sort of ganglion and a nerve cord, and then you go on to fish, which have a relatively small brain. Amphioxus has an extremely small one. And as you look at the vertebrates, you can see a continuous gradation of brains getting bigger and bigger and bigger, starting off, as I say, just a ganglion at the head of the spinal cord and then getting bigger. So we've got it before our very eyes. We can see how it would have evolved. Brains don't fossilize, but you can see the brain case in fossils as well. So as I say, it's the argument from personal incredulity, and it's deeply unimpressive.
But do you think there's some sort of a natural selection process, or do you think that it is all intelligent design?
Well, I think everything was created. And maybe things do move on and adapt and change through time. But I think that that's a function of an intelligent thought. I can't intellectually tell you why I don't believe in evolution, but I don't. It's just a feeling. I don't think I was some ape, or I don't think my ancestors were. I think they had to be pretty smart to survive.
So what do you think all these pre-human hominids are that they keep discovering?
Like, tell me what a pre-human hominid
like Australopithecus,
right.
Or some of the other human-like creatures that never made it, like Denisovans, Neanderthals.
Yeah. Well, they've got something called Zinjanthropus. You remember him?
No.
They looked at it and they did some core samples on it, and it was put out there by people advocating evolution, and they discovered that it was a human skull attached to the jaw of an ape.
Oh, I do remember.
So it was a hoax.
Yeah.
Zinjanthropus, a hoax. That's rubbish. That's absolute rubbish. He's muddling it up with Piltdown Man. Zinjanthropus is not a hoax. Zinjanthropus is a perfectly respectable fossil. It's changed its name now to Paranthropus. But it's a perfectly respectable fossil discovered by Mary Leakey and Louis Leakey published about it. he's muddling it up with Piltdown Man, which was a hoax perpetrated in 1912 and was later exposed as a hoax. Piltdown Man was never evidence for evolution anyway. That's really muddling up Piltdown Man and Zinjanthropus is just amazing. Then before that, he said, it's just a feeling. Well, feelings don't count in science. He says, I don't believe my ancestor was an ape. Of course, I mean, who cares what he believes? The question is, what's the evidence? And the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. We now have an enormous number of fossils from Africa showing a beautiful series of evolution of hominids. Zinjanthropus was not our ancestor. Zinjanthropus was one of the, Paranthropus, I should say, was one of the so-called robust hominids. And we are in a different line, the gracile ones. But it was is indeed a fascinating skull, and nothing to do with Piltdown, which indeed was a hoax.
The truth of the matter is, there is more reason for you to believe there is a God than there is for you to not. The fact that it was already set up on this planet for there to be medicines for us to find and to utilize. And, to make a cow, it means you had to also have made grass. And it means you would have had to have invented a whole new eating system for this animal, which was cud. And that means you would then have to have given him 3 stomachs to be able to, and you would have to have known that he was going to then emit a gas that was going to be necessary on the planet. Like,
I don't know who that was, but that's a very strange sort of argument. It sounds as though he's saying that the world was set up for humans, and therefore that implies design. Of course, natural selection sees to it that whatever world there was, we would have adapted to it. So because there was grass, cows evolved. It wasn't that grass had to be there before cows. I mean, it wasn't that grass was put there in order for cows to evolve. That's putting the argument backwards. That's putting the cart before the horse. Everywhere you look in the living world, it has apparent design written all over it. And it was only when I understood that Darwin had an alternative explanation, a much better explanation for apparent design. It isn't design at all. It's produced by the non-random process called Darwinian natural selection. Once I understood that, there was no longer any need for God.
He clearly would look at creation and say, yes, there is apparent design. But then he said Charles Darwin, right? And he's talking about natural selection again. You're going to find this often with Richard Dawkins and many evolutionists as they equate natural selection and evolution as the same thing. Natural selection is a loss of information. You could definitely say that from the original kind of dog to like a poodle, there's been a loss of information. Evolution requires a gain of information. It requires an organism to literally gather new information and then become a different organism. This has never been observed in nature, ever.
Well, yes, it does require an increase in information, and that is provided by mutation, random genetic change, plus non-random selection. That is precisely where the information comes from. It's a very simple process to understand. It's very complicated in its details, but that is where the information comes from.
I have long been unable to understand the atheist in this world of so much beauty. And I've had an unholy desire to invite some atheists to a dinner and then serve the most fabulous gourmet dinner that has ever been concocted. And after dinner, ask them if they believed there was a cook.
Oh, really? Come on. I hope Ronald Reagan was a better president than he is a thinker. I mean, really. This is such an elementary argument. If it was really that simple, then all biologists would disbelieve in evolution. It's not that simple. That's a pathetic argument. That's the sort of naive argument of somebody who's absolutely ignorant of everything about biology. You have to know something before you can put an argument, and evidently he got a good laugh for that. The audience must have been as ignorant as he was.
The universe is very complex. If you look at the properties of the universe as documented by theistic and atheistic cosmologists, they refer to a fine-tuning of the universe. I talked about Martin Rees, who wrote a book, Just 6 Numbers. He details 6 numbers. All of these numbers, he says, describe the reality of the universe. He said, had one of these numbers been different, the universe would not be able to facilitate human life, and there would not be a fine-tuning of the universe. Or the universe could not exist in the complex way it does. If we look around and see the intelligent design, it must really follow that we say that there must be an intelligent designer. You see what I mean?
Martin Rees did indeed write a book called Just 6 Numbers, and he did indeed say that if any one of those numbers, but the fundamental constants of physics had been a little bit different, you wouldn't have got the universe as we know it, and you wouldn't have got life. And that's a very respectable argument, which physicists often put. There are various answers to it. One is that if the universe had been different because of this, then maybe a different kind of life would have evolved. But a much more powerful argument is the one that Martin Rees himself actually prefers, and which that speaker, whoever it was, ignored, which is to say that there is a multiverse. There are other good reasons to expect a multiverse. There are other good reasons which physicists have. It follows from other physical theories that there will be not just one universe with one set of physical constants, but millions of universes with different values of the physical constants. And most of those universes will not be conducive to life, will not be conducive to producing galaxies, to producing planets, to producing chemistry, to producing life. But a minority, maybe only a very small minority, will be. And of course, we have to be living in one of that minority, because here we are. That's the so-called anthropic principle. And that's the argument that Martin Rees himself puts forward in that very book, which that man selectively quoted.
There's always been a fundamental difference between creationism or creation science and intelligent design approach to biology. The one, creation science, begins with an understanding of the Genesis account and tries to reconcile that to scientific data, to scientific observation. The other begins really with an unpolluted, unembellished version of science, which is simply that science is the use of observation and reason to come to true understanding of the world. So intelligent design does nothing other than take a science view in its simplest form and apply it to the world and the living world in particular. When you do that, you end up being forced by reason and observation to this conclusion that living things are designed.
Creationists lost various battles in the American courts, and therefore they changed their tactics. They changed their name to intelligent design. It's the same thing. They don't rely on Genesis this time, but if you actually listen to what they say to their own disciples rather than out in public, it's quite clearly the God of the Old Testament that they have in mind. It is not a good argument, if we turn now to the actual argument that they put. It's the argument from personal incredulity, as I said for the first of these clips. I don't understand it, therefore God did it. That is not an intelligent scientific argument. You have two hypotheses. One is intelligent design, and the other is science. And science has a massive lot of evidence in its favor. Intelligent design has absolutely none. But what they say is, because I found a difficulty that I can't understand something in the scientific explanation, therefore the other one must be right. Hypothesis A and hypothesis B are laid before us. You find what you think is a flaw in hypothesis A. You can't actually understand how it works. Therefore, hypothesis B must be right. That is not a good scientific argument.
The idea of intelligent design. Why are they wrong?
So they mock because they don't have an answer. Because the more we know about these things, the clearer it becomes. And what we're talking about is the motors and the contraptions inside living things. They're just so sophisticated. Things like ATP synthase is present in all living things. There's no way it can come about by any evolutionary process. So they use mocking rather than engagement with the arguments because that's all they have. They're up the creek without a paddle and they know it. And so if they would engage with the evidence, I don't believe they'd be evolutionists.
There's no way it can be explained. Once again, the argument from personal incredulity. I don't understand it, therefore God did it. We've had this 3 times now. It doesn't wash. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. Read a book, for goodness sake.
In the Bible, it starts with Genesis 1:1. Hold up. Will you dare say amen? Amen. Amen. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 1 verse 2 says the earth was formless and empty. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And let me tell you something. Right there, that light was so good. Shining. And I said, shining. Turn to your neighbor and say, yes. Yes.
You might call that child abuse. I mean, that child has been drilled to speak that rubbish, and it's very tragic, and I suppose it was a bit of thrown in as a bit of a comic relief, but really.
When Richard Dawkins admitted to lying about Jesus,